The Highland Model 3, Tesla's at it. Yes, it's real, and I know because I've seen it, at least parts of it. I'm Brian. Welcome to my Tesla Weekend, joined by our good friend Herbert from Brighter with Herbert. Good morning again. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Brian. This is one of my favorite topics. I love the revised Model 3. I think it's a big deal.
It's going to be exciting. So let's get into some real easy ones. What is the Highland 3 and what's going on? Well, it is the alleged refreshed version of the Model 3. And a lot of us believe it's real. You remember back in April, we got to see some of the spy photos from leaked inside a building in Fremont. You can tell it's Fremont because the steel inside the building is oxidized, like you would see in an older factory that is near the coast with all that salty water. And that was our first big clue that it was coming. And then we saw it in motion. As you'll recall, the Kilowatts was able to capture that one. Ryan does great work. And yeah, he's been able to spot a bunch of great stuff. I don't know how he does it. So these are all good indicators that something is going on. But what? So they're going to be... So then we heard that when he was in China, they were looking to actually see it. And there were some people who thought we're actually going to see it. And I think the answer was no, Elon got to see it. Because remember, there are only two Model 3 factories, one in China and one in Fremont. And if one flips, the other needs to flip. If one's going to go first by a significant margin, it would need to be the Fremont factory. But really, they both need to do it at the same time. So, and then we've also seen... We've seen a bunch of other little leaks, but then we also saw in some drone footage from Wuwa a vehicle out in this little testing lot next to what we believe is the design center that had camouflage on the front bonnet, and it seems like the sort of thing where they've never used this area for anything else. What is it for? So those are the established facts. What do you think of that?
No, absolutely. Yeah. There's so many of these videos we've seen. We've seen photos. We've seen even like you said, little spy videos of it being tested in a track. There's all these things. The question is, what exactly, is it just a facelift? Is it just minor changes to it? So that's what we know already. But what have you seen that you're saying that you went to Detroit, you found something important, right? So what is this?
So I went to Michigan and I had a chance to participate in probably 5 or 6 different events over the course of the week. Because, you look at my schedule and you say, you're going for a 2-day event. Why are you gone for almost 7 days? And the answer was because there's too much to do. Michigan is ground zero for auto production in the U.S. You say, well, they don't make cars there anymore. Yeah, they do. They make a lot. They just don't make as many as they used to. But that's where most of the engineering still is. So if you're in Michigan and you meet someone at a car show, at a Tesla event for sure, but kind of anywhere, if they're not directly involved in the auto industry, they know 3 to 10 people who are.
Yeah.
So what I found was, and there's the Kilowatts again, we've already got that. I've seen parts. I have seen them with my eyeballs. So I can tell you that the Model 3 refresh, whether you call it a Highland or not, we can debate that in a minute, is real. And for example, I've seen the brake lights, and this is a spy shot of them a little bit exposed, and this is really not exposed. This is the absolute minimum you can do to legally drive this thing around. But I've seen them. I've seen the whole thing, and all I can tell you is they're not very exciting. They just look like brake lights.
Yeah.
But maybe when they're in the whole thing, it'll be different.
Brian,
but what
are
I've
you
also
showing
seen,
something? Because I'm not seeing anything.
I am. It just shows up on my end. It's part of the mystery. But what I've also seen is they've got a new Prindle. Do you know what a Prindle is?
I do not.
That's the display that shows you what gear you're in. Park, reverse, neutral, drive, low.
That's what they call Prindle. Prindle. You made that up.
No, that's what it's called. But it, I guess on a Tesla, it'd be called a Perned. But and I know it sounds like Prongles or Pringles, but no, it's a Prindle. And when you're backing out of your parking spot, do you ever forget what gear you're in?
all the time. But I mean, I'm
All the
always
time.
checking to see what's
There are
happening.
people
Yeah.
who I've watched. I've been a passenger in many Teslas, and what I've noticed is some people rely on the cameras, and some people still use their mirrors.
Yes.
If you're using the cameras, you can see clearly which gear you're in, but if you're using the mirrors, you can't. They're adding a Prindle above the camera, above the rear view mirror. So when you look in the mirror, you can see what gear you're in.
But Brian, one of the spy drones, so we saw this revised Model 3 that was doing the laps around the track to be tested.
Sure.
They had a zoom in, and they said that this is now going to be controlled by the screen. That
It is.
computer, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, but in the meantime, when you look in your rearview mirror, if you've just put it in gear, it will tell you what gear you're in.
Gotcha.
And then as soon as you start driving, it fades out.
Nice.
So it's really only when you look up at it that when you would look at that mirror anyway to change directions that it'll say right there what gear you're in. So that's kind of neat. And
Very neat. Yeah.
I have seen those parts. And the big thing I've seen, and this is just a Google image search of auto wholesale parts order, just to have something up that looks pretty, is I have seen the orders. One of the suppliers I talked with, and I've talked with 3 different people, 2 different kinds of parts makers, and a warehousing kind of supplier, and they see orders moving through the warehouses. They see orders in transit from a variety of car companies. I don't know which all, but far more than just Tesla. And they have confirmed to me on, I don't know how much I can say without it becoming clear who it was that I talked to or narrowing it down too much. But the orders are real and present, and they're happening. Yeah.
Okay. Specifically, though, you're talking about orders for this Model 3 parts.
Yes. Go into depth on that, I shall. So what it is they can see all the parts that go everywhere and when. So, for example, you've got, let's say, Ford, for example, you might see that they ordered 20 of this particular item to be shipped to a very unusual location. Those are parts that they think that dealership is going to need in 6 months.
Right. Yeah.
So those are scheduled out. For Tesla, there are new part numbers that have shown up that have not been placed as orders, but as projections. So the projections are known, but the orders have not been confirmed, meaning don't ship them yet, ship them very, very soon. So I guess then the question is, when do the orders convert, right? So we've got China, we've already seen it out on the track testing. Fremont, we've seen it out testing. I asked, one of them said that they have ordered a number of them that would lead them to believe that they have already completed their crash testing. And I asked, are these parts going to China? Will China be out first? And what he told me was, they don't use the same parts. They get their parts
exactly.
locally.
I was going to say that. It makes more sense that the Chinese supplier is going to supply the Chinese Tesla Model 3s.
Correct.
So
Same
this is
part,
going to the
different
Fremont.
provider. Yes. So they can't. That system, that ordering system, is not part of the same system, so they can't see it. So yeah, it is believed that they would both roll out as close to the same time as possible.
Is that what you think, Brian? Would you expect that if they announce that the Model 3, revised Model 3 is available, would it happen at the same time in Shanghai and Fremont? Or would they say it's available in China first and maybe a month later it's Fremont? Or how does that work usually?
So it would have to be at the same time. When you're talking about your Honda Accord, you know when the new models come out. It's every September. And that's clockwork. You can predict it. And because everyone knows that, everyone anticipates it, and it's just how it works. And then you see year-end model blowout savings, where if the change between last year's model and this year's model is significant enough, there are people who might not want the old one unless they can get $1,000, $2,000 off. If they were to release it in China before the U.S. by a month or more, Model 3 sales in the U.S. would crater. But there's also ways to blow them out. You could, I believe that even though the new version will be much cheaper to make, it'll still sell for a premium in the beginning, because there are people who will pay a premium, and why not? They would have every opportunity to just do the most up-optioned versions available. And then, of course, you've got fleet buyers. So even if they were somehow the exact same price and consumers like you and I said, well, I'm definitely getting the new one, the fleet buyers, cities, rental car companies, they would happily take a $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 discount just to get them. And I think we've talked about McRib pricing before, but the McRib at McDonald's doesn't come around all the time, and when it comes around is not predictable. What they do is, when there's overproduction of pork, rather than reduce the price for everyone at the store, which would not increase demand, they just give it to places like McDonald's at a discount, because even if they're losing a little bit of money on that, they're still keeping their margins up on everything else, and that's what really matters. So that's how they would do it. So I asked, is it imminent? Are we talking next week, the week after? The answer was nope. They don't have the parts yet. They will order them. They can, for the things that this company does, where I got to actually see what their orders look like, their lead time is about a month. So will it happen this month? No. Unless they were to be getting those parts from China. And he did say that on a number of the parts, Tesla will have more than one supplier. So it's entirely possible that they only saw some of the orders for that particular part, but not necessarily going out that way.
That's disappointing, Brian, because we all were hoping that it was going to come out on June 28th, which is 6.28, which is double 3.14, which is Pi Day. So June 28th is Tau Day, and it would have been perfect if it was on that day. So I guess that theory sounds like it's not going to happen.
It sounds like that's not going to happen. They would not have the parts available. So one of the questions was, and I think we've talked about this before, but how do we come out with the refresh without risking a prolonged shutdown like we had with the S and X?
Right.
And the answer to that is both Fremont and Shanghai have 2 lines for Model 3. I believe they would shut one down and just leave the other one running until they get the new one done, and then finally shut it off. And they might even wait a week or 2 of the new line running to get it dialed in a bit to start matching demand. But that's kind of what would happen there. And that in Fremont and Shanghai, that would happen. Now, we saw a slowdown. So again, why do we believe it's imminent? We saw a slowdown of Model 3 production in China. Didn't turn off entirely, but the numbers were reduced. At the end of this month, when we see registrations in Europe and China with a little better clarity, we may be able to see if the Model 3 has dropped by 30 to 45%, that would tell me one of the lines is closed and the other is running at maximum capacity. Because if you think about it, you cut your production in half, you don't have any supply bottlenecks, that's for sure. And so, yeah, there's just no way it's not happening, and happening fairly soon. So I guess I would say, what's your definition of a Highland, and does this meet it?
Before we get there, though, I wanted to ask you, did you already cover the brake lights?
The brake lights, I just said that I have seen them in person myself. And
they
are not the original
revised
Model
3 is supposed to have a very specific new kinds of brake lights that we had seen in the spy photos, right? So that's how we know it's different.
Well, it's different because the part number is different. The mounting is different. It's a different light bulb. It's a different fixture.
So here's the debate, right? The community is having this big debate. So obviously it's time for the Model 3 to have a revision and kind of refinement and improvement of what it was before. But it could just be a standard revision that they normally do, a refresh, right? The question is, why is the community so big on calling it the Project Highland? There's this big expectation that's going to be a really lower cost. And so I think for me, I don't consider it to be a revised Model 3. I don't consider it to be Highland unless it has GigaCasting, either just one, either both front and rear, or just one. But for me, it needs to be this new way to build the car to match the cost efficiencies that they did with Model Y. Excuse me. Because it will reduce the cost significantly. And if it's a reduction of cost very significantly, then they can reduce the price potentially or increase margin. Then that is significant to me. That's the purpose of why they're calling it Project Highland. It's referencing Ford's Highland Park where they were just a masterful inefficiency in reducing the cost of the Model T way back when. But if it's just a revision, how do you know? How do we know if it's if it includes some sort of casting? That would be my definition.
So there's a couple of great answers here. I asked one of the suppliers, why are we calling it Project Highland? Because I know why you and I are calling it that. That's the rumor we've heard. And the answer is that's apparently what Tesla's calling it. It shows up in the schematics that come over for the parts. Wow. It says on it Highland.
Okay, so this is big news. You've confirmed this, like from a supplier of Tesla, saying that they actually physically saw the word Highland in their parts. This is big news, Brian. This is good news.
In the schematics, that's what they called it. Now, bear in mind, there are movies that have been made under code names because they didn't want what they're working on to be leaked. But at least within Tesla, this is absolutely what they're calling it. So right there, even if you just read a little bit into the tea leaves, if Highland means Ford's Highland plant, then this is supposed to be a somewhat significant step change. Yeah. Then the question you had was, are they really? So my question is, why would they do a facelift but not a real rethink? The Model S had almost no facelift, but once you get under the skin, it's a very different car. It has more legroom than the old one somehow. I finally had a chance to ride in a Plaid, specifically 4 different ones, back to back over the course of about 2 hours. And my eyeballs are still coming unglued from the back of my head. They're going to have a video about that pretty soon. But then the question you had is, are they going to go with the castings? And I believe the answer is yes, for a bunch of reasons. One is it is cost efficient, and the volume will justify it. A limited production vehicle, mega castings don't make sense. The setup is very upfront intensive in that regard. But another reason is, if you watch the drone footage, which I've just pulled up, the casting operation in Fremont is not running at full speed. It's had an awful lot of downtime lately over the past 3-4 updates. Yeah. And you'd seen them stockpiling tons and tons of castings. So this leads me to believe that one of these may be offline for the addition of the front and rear castings for that. Initially, you had a limited number of castings because the machines are very hard to come by. And they take a long time to build, but we've had years to get to it. So why would they do a facelift at all if not to add features and or drastically reduce costs in ways that they already know how to? So all of that adds up. And the idea that Highland is just not coming, I guess could be justified for people outside the automotive supply chain. But I've met an awful lot of people, and that's the beauty of being in Michigan, is you can't back out of a parking spot without knocking into 2 different people who are in those different fields. And I've got another video coming up I'm very excited about. I got to interview one of the designers in the drivetrain division of the Mach-E. And he's a retired Ford engineer, and I am very excited to be sharing that. So I've got this poll up, Herbert, that says, when's it coming? When will we see it? And the choices are month or less, later this year, next year, or never. It doesn't exist. What do you think the results are?
I think most people who are watching this channel think it's going to happen in a month or less. Actually, I'm sorry. I'll say later this year.
That's correct. 52% say later this year. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and end that poll.
Well, what do you say, Brian?
Oh, I say later this year, without a doubt.
Which means not July. You're saying September?
Yeah, I think September would probably be about right.
Or later. Yeah.
No, I think, September is August, September. Yeah, it's very close. And it's possible that the more complicated parts that have a longer lead time have already been ordered. Oh, come on, computer, don't do
but
that.
I guess what was confusing to me is you just went through a bunch of kind of like little bird droppings. What do you call it? Easter egg. What's the word?
Easter eggs. Clues. Bird droppings.
These little clues. That was not bird droppings. That's weird. There's something I'm mixing up my metaphors. Anyways, but the one you just said was that they've slowed down the production lines. They're not going to slow down production line for months till September, right?
Yes, but the Model 3 is doesn't have the same kind of demand as the Model Y. And I talked with a guy who had rented one from Hertz. He took it out for a week. His cost to rent the Model 3 from Hertz for 1 week was $208.
Yeah, nobody's.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not in high demand.
So,
but if it was just just cosmetic changes, you wouldn't need to shut down a whole production line, would you? And not this for this long.
well, we don't know exactly when the shutdowns happened, but I would agree that just for a simple facelift, if all we're changing is sheet metal and lights, no, that's the kind of changeover you could do. Probably, you could do the changeover in days and get it calibrated and dialed in within a week. So I would agree that that is another reason how we know that this is something more significant than that. Yeah. By the way, in the comments, 2 people pointed out, did you mean breadcrumbs?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I knew it was wrong. Breadcrumbs. Thank you.
Oh, Simon points out September seems unlikely because they wouldn't start delivering Highland and Cybertruck the same month, would they?
Would they not?
Why not? Why not? If once they're ready, they will put them both out as soon as they wouldn't hold off to get ready. I think it would be, yeah.
Well, the one good reason might be that you want to give Cybertruck its due. You want to give it special. You want to keep it by its own presentation, and you want to go out with all the articles written about it, all about that. You don't want to dilute it with people talking about, oh, by the way, they also have this other thing. Right?
I can see that. The other thing we're getting in the comments is, yeah, but Cybertruck's really going to be November. It's like, well,
yeah,
that could be. And if these both come out before the end of the year, we are going to be talking about some big catalysts in terms of, for those watching who don't know, Herbert is famous as the milestones guy. And he says these milestones are going to be the catalysts. And I started following them, I guess it was probably last year. And we just watched. And as they they just kept hitting and hitting within very close to when he said, so I was like, hey man, could you do an interview for me? And that was kind of where all this madness started. And it's, if both of those happen, it's going to be huge because we'll have high margin on the Model 3 refresh. We'll have high margins on the early Cybertrucks, and we'll see demand that is so big that it's going to be talked about.
It has to be a revised Model 3 that is a true refresh with a casting. If it doesn't have a GigaCastings to show that a significant cost reduction, then it's going to be nothing. It won't do anything. But if it's like a true new segment that they've proven they can win, and remember you and I did a big show, lots of data on the segmentation of sedans and cars, that if, not just SUVs or trucks, if they can truly define that, because they can increase the sales of the Model 3, double it, if not more, right?
So Undercover EV wants to know, what are the odds that the Roadster will be the surprise in the next 6 months?
No, I don't think so. Remember he said,
Yeah.
he just recently said at a investor day or shareholder day where he said the Roadster, but it's going to be, I know you've been waiting for a long time, just wait a little bit longer. Right?
He said maybe next year.
Yeah, I think so.
So I agree. And I think tackling all 3 plus ramping the Semi, by the way, I do have word on the Semi. My source in Nevada is no longer there. But when he was still there, he was saying they were producing about 1 a day. So if you're watching this and you work at any Tesla factory, by all means get in touch, because I'm very good at protecting my sources, as that unnamed person can tell you. Even though he's not there, I'm still not revealing even what his job was. I forget who said it may be the same casting as the new Model 3. Oh, for the Roadster. That was me speculating that, and I don't see anyone else who shared my speculation, so maybe not. And DRK says, let's get this stream to 200 likes, people. We got the numbers. That'd be great.
I love you, DRK.
I'd love that. DRK is so great in so
Yeah.
many of the chats, in so many of the videos. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. We're speculating on timing. When it happens, how would it move? How would you do that kind of switch over?
Right.
Because didn't we already start seeing some signals where reducing pricing of Model 3s in anticipation of getting the inventory out so that they can then launch a new line? Again, it's all lining up nicely, but if you guys now are pushing the date to September, that seems a little too far away.
Sure. And I don't know. So I think more like August, which is in like 6.5 weeks. August starts.
Yeah.
So the way it would work is, it is believed that the crash testing is done, and that is all internally certified anyway. And I don't think the change would be so radical that they would need to crash 100 of them to know what they're doing. Just a normal number, maybe 5 to 10. But then what I think they would do is hide them. Is they would start with production of 100 a week, 500 a week, and hide them. That's a number that's easy to hide. And then you'd start. The thing I'm looking for from Fremont is a number of enclosed car carriers, or a number of open air car carriers with vehicles with covers, which would probably be the more economical way to transport large numbers. If we see the footage in Fremont where there's hidden cars that are obscured in ways that we haven't seen typically, it would be interesting. And then, yeah, once it's time to go, once they say it is now, there could still be a few more days or even weeks of production of the legacy Model 3 just to meet demand from people who are saying, I would pay 36, 37, but I don't want to pay 45, 48. I think the higher price will be enough to motivate people to continue buying these ones while production ramps up to meet the new demand. I think this changeover in China will be the same principle, but happen more quickly. And I think in Shanghai they'll have a much easier time hiding the cars because there's only 2 drone pilots there, and they're a lot easier to predict and see what they're doing, as opposed to Fremont, where you've got an awful lot of people, including people who've never flown a drone before. People will buy drones just to go out to Fremont and see what they can see. So that's, probably what's going on there. So I think that's how the changeover will work, and pricing alone will probably be enough to differentiate the models. And I agree with you. They're not going to do that huge kind of change unless it makes sense with the financials on their end. Because all they would get from just a facelift is an increase in demand. And with all the iterative changes that go on mid-year, throughout the year, most car companies make very small changes in advance. When you get a whole new platform for your Accord, for example, a lot of the changes coming up from each model, the next year the hood's a little different, the next year the lights are a little different. Those changes typically are at least mostly planned in advance. So when that new chassis rolls out, there are people in the design studio who know what the next 6 Honda Accords will look like. Now, there will be variations in that as they get out into the real world and start actually doing them. But most of the changes are cosmetic and anticipated in advance, so that each year it gets a little cooler. And again, changes can occur. So, but with Tesla, as you know, you can get new changes every day.
Every day.
Every day is a bit unlikely, but even 2 or 3 times a week for a subtle improvement is not uncommon. They've already switched from using the super bottle to the octavalve quite a while back. And what's left? Structural battery, even if it's made out of LFP, and front and rear castings. Those are going to be the 2 big cost reductions. But I'm sure there's a bunch of other little cost reductions too. Simplified weldings, more universal use of a smaller number of fasteners, things like that. At the Ford Museum I went to the Ford Museum, got to see the inside of the Rouge plant. In that museum, you could see they showed a front bumper piece of trim. And they said, here's a piece of trim, here's what it looks like, and here's all 27 components of it. 3 years later, here's the same part, 8 components. And there's efficiencies to be gained by changing the line. And I agree with you, the change will be more radical because that's where the radical savings are. And I did ask Corey at Monroe Live, real quick, Corey Steuben, I said, which is cheaper to build, the 3 or the Y? Because we'd heard the Y would be cheaper. And he said, I don't think it is. I think they're about the same price because, and this is an interview that'll be running soon. I got a lot of footage shot. And he said it's because even though the production process is simpler on the Model 3, the number of atoms, or simpler on the Model Y, the number of atoms saved in the Model 3 makes it more comparable. So that means the new Model 3 would be significantly cheaper to make over the long term and could be made on a shorter line thanks to the reduction of a couple hundred $250,000 robots.
Yeah. So it's amazing that you actually traveled to Michigan. You talked to suppliers. You said you saw it with your own eyeballs, and you asked all these wonderful questions. So you validated that there are definitely parts. You validated that the word Highland is in the supplier's kind of documentation. So there's a lot more evidence now. You coming back this week saying that this is happening. I just had a wonderful video with Warren Redlich last Thursday. He himself has come up with his own kind of video that he published on his own channel. And he believes that there is no such thing as the Highland. And he kind of shared clips and audio of the Tesla executives. And based on what they were saying, that it did not sound like that they're going to be releasing a radical new product this year, that they're going to reduce the cost of Model 3. Otherwise, they would have announced it way back in January. So what's your kind of rebuttal or thinking about what you heard about what Warren is saying?
If you had asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have disagreed politely because we've seen so many bits of footage of it out in the real world in both Fremont and Shanghai. But having been to Michigan, I don't know how many automobile executives or engineers. I don't know how much auto industry folks there are in Florida or how many he's met. But I think just the fact that I'm getting out there and actually meeting these industry professionals in person and having conversations with them gives me confidence that the people I'm talking to are real and that they're, and that they're knowledgeable. I think I don't know the basis of a plausible claim why Highland. The most plausible thing I think we could expect in the light most favorable to his argument would be that maybe the refresh is less substantial than you and I believe it is. And that's possible because I haven't talked to anyone who could definitively say there's castings, I've seen them. I haven't had that. I haven't talked to people who've said I know it's going to have a structural battery. I don't know about that. So it's entirely possible that Highland is real and the efficiency gains are not going to be as meaningful as you and I might like. I would say that's the compromise there.
Low probability, though. I mean, like you said earlier, if they're going to revise this, they're going to make some work on it. They're going to shut down production lines for a couple of weeks, which, by the way, just that alone is already contrary to what the executives had said earlier. They had said that we're not going to shut down production lines. We're going to build a brand new factory in Nuevo Leon that's going to be on this new unboxed model. And yet there are signals here that we're seeing slowdowns in China and Fremont, although Warren's response to that was that happens all the time, which is true. In some cases, production lines are always, there's fluctuations on how efficient, but it's a matter of how long they are shutting them down. And, so that part is interesting to follow.
It is. And I don't think that this necessarily disagrees with what the executives have said on calls. I think Warren's reading a bit more into the tea leaves than I would, but I am no stranger to wild speculation of my own. So that's not anything against Warren in that regard. I think it's going to be the fact that they would shut down one line and not the other doesn't seem crazy to me or contrary to what they were saying. And yeah, like you said, we have seen parts of lines shut down. We saw Berlin shut down about a year ago for retooling so they could improve efficiency. The week after, Herbert Diess was there saying, wow, they move products from the indoor to the outdoor 3 times faster than us. What can we do to catch up? And right as that happened, they're like, yeah, we're actually shutting down to make it faster. So, oh, come on. It's a moving target. I'm never going to hit this thing. So, and by the way, in the comments, Roger Starkey said he checked Model 3, 72 pounds a day in London, $92 a week. And that's what this gentleman had seen on Hertz as well, but he booked 2 months out. So it's entirely possible if you book at a different time or try a different location that the rates could be better or different. But I just know that he'd gotten that car from Ann Arbor, Michigan. And fortunately, he was one of the few drivers I've ever talked to where when he picked up the car, the attendant said, here, hop in. I'm going to show you how to adjust your mirrors and stuff because it's not intuitive if you've never been in one. So that was great, and they need to do more of that. Mm-hmm. But what we also did is Kelly and Bert, Kelly is the treasurer of the Michigan Owners Club, and her husband Bert, great guy. They have an Adopt a Supercharger program where they go out to Supercharger locations and just pick up trash.
Clean it up.
And
Nice.
and the reason they're doing it is so they can educate renters and Turo drivers on what they're missing. And twice we would have people, one time Kelly's just picking up trash and somebody sees her, doesn't know who she is and says, do you know anything about how to make this work? So she showed him
Nice.
got his mirrors adjusted, showed him how to use the navigation to understand the Supercharger network. And it's just a great thing that they do. It's just a great thing that they do for the community and for us as investors because it enhances the experience for people. And a lot of these will go home and buy them. So that's pretty good. So I did want to, before I forget, thank my patrons who get early access, bonus content, all that kind of stuff, and keep the channel running. And now, as of today, my subscriptions on Twitter have been turned on.
Yes,
They have been
finally.
activated. Yeah, I sent a bunch of messages to the guy in charge, and he never responded. So I tweeted it out, and magically it got fixed very quickly. So that's exciting.
Very nice.
We'll have some interesting bonus content over there, I imagine. Let's see if there's any last comments we need to address about the Highland Model 3. Let's see. I think that's about it. Anybody, if you've got last second comments, get them in because we are winding this down.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to be visiting Mexico in mid-August. So I'm looking for somebody I can interview, somebody I can research. I'm not as good as you are when you travel like you do and meet folks. So if you know somebody, if anybody knows somebody I should be meeting, I'll love to do that.
That would be cool. John wants to know, will some rich person donate Sandy a Model 3 Highland when it comes out? Can't wait for his team to take it apart. Right? That's my reaction is, no, he'll buy one.
Of course.
He'll buy one. Here's a neat one. If when they finished the teardown of the new Model Y with the 4680s, the batteries were available for sale. $800. They sold them. Sandy and the team at Monroe sold them. $800. How many of them did they sell?
I don't know. All of them?
About $500,000 worth.
What?
Yeah. Corey shared that with us at our panel in Michigan last week. And
pays for it.
The crowd was pretty quiet. They were like, whoa. Yeah, that paid for probably the whole teardown right there. It was, and you think, and I told my wife that, and she said, 800, who on earth is paying that? And I said, every battery manufacturer, every car manufacturer, a bunch of well-moneyed enthusiasts for sure. I mean, I'm sure you and I can name a couple people who probably have one.
I would love to have a part that I'm going to put in the my right here to show on my wall here or my table. I'd love to.
Well, I
something.
did get a Monroe Live hat, so that was cool, which I have since worn in videos. I'm probably more famous wearing that than no hat at all. Because if you know what that hat means, you should be watching my channel.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I did get to see all in an interview coming up. I did get to go to Monroe. I did get to interview Corey, and
Wonderful.
He showed me all the husks that are left at the end. And he compared, by the way, you know when they switched from a dual casting Model Y where there was 2 on the back instead of 1?
Yes.
And I said, so 1 part instead of 2. And Corey said, no, come look, walk with me. It's not 2 parts. It's 2 big castings, plus the part on top, plus 17 rivets, whatever it was. Plus, the new one goes up higher, so it eliminates some parts along the side, and the crush cans are integrated all the way out to the bumper. Wow. So it didn't go from 2 parts to 1. It went from 40 parts to 1, and it's amazing what they're doing out there. But it was a really great experience to actually see all this stuff myself. And I did get to ask Corey a couple of questions that made him light up a little bit. So I was excited about that. But as you know, I take my interviews very seriously.
You do. You're amazing. I'm so glad that you went there and found all this information, new information.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those watching it live, just hit the like button real quick so somebody else can find out this video exists. For everybody else, subscribe and like and do all that good stuff. And for those watching later, what did we miss? What did we misunderstand? Leave it all in the comments. You gotta, otherwise how will I know? And so with that said, Herbert, I want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And everyone else, stay tuned, stay juicy.